Glad you decided to join us today. My name is Scott. I'm one of the pastors here at Grace. We're in part 3 of our series, Mysteries, the greatest stories that Jesus told. Let me tell you about this. When I was growing up, my dad was an avid gardener. We had a huge garden in our backyard. We grew everything back there. We grew corn. You name it, we grew it. And I learned a lot about gardening through him. Well, this past spring, my family and I, we decided we're going to put that knowledge to use and we're going to start our own garden again. So we did. We went out there, we turned the soil, we added a bunch of stuff to it, and we planted the plants. Now here's a little tip for you that I knew and I figured out. If you dig a hole and you put an egg in there and then you put the plant in, that's going to help the plant grow a lot better because it gives it a lot of nutrients. So this year we had an amazing garden. We had bucket loads of tomatoes and cucumbers and you name it, we had it. Watermelons, peppers, I grew jalapenos, they grew. It was a great garden. Here's the interesting thing. We also had things growing back there that I didn't intentionally plant. So what happened was last year after the fall season, the pumpkins that we bought, well, they kind of started getting mushy, as you know they do. And so I just chucked them in the garden. Well, apparently, the soil was so good that those seeds got into the soil, and we have an entire pumpkin patch back there. Now, that's not growing because I did anything in particular or any great planting method. It's growing because of the condition of the soil. We're going to learn about today the importance of good soil. And as I mentioned, we're in part 3 of our series, Mysteries, and we're going to be looking at the parables that Jesus told. Now, just as a reminder, a parable is a story about something that is familiar in order to explain something that is not familiar. Jesus told today's story using the example of agriculture. His audience was very familiar with agriculture. It's how many of them made their living. And he uses this story about agriculture to explain some deeper truths. So in today's parable, Jesus talks about different kinds of soil and how seeds are going to be planted and how that soil is going to receive those things that are planted. It's a critically important parable for 2 reasons. First, it establishes and it sets the groundwork for the other parables. This parable is in 3 of the 4 chapters. And in the book of Mark, Jesus' disciples, they ask him, after he tells this parable, they ask him to explain it. Here's what Jesus said. He says, "Do you not understand this parable? How then will you understand all the parables?" What Jesus is saying to his disciples and his followers is, if you don't understand this one, you're not going to understand the other parables. But if you do understand this one, you are going to understand the other parables because this one lays the foundation for all the other ones. For example, if you understand this one, the one that we're going to study today, then you're going to understand the parable of the mustard seed. You're going to understand the parable of the weeds. You're going to understand the parable of the fishing net. This one is the key that unlocks the other parables. The other reason that this one is critically important is because it's a very practical parable about evangelism. It gives us the framework to understand why different people respond to the gospel in different ways. And that's the basis for our big idea for today. Our big idea is this: how people respond to the gospel is determined by the condition of their heart. So today, as we unpack this, we're going to see that how a person responds to the gospel, it largely depends on their heart. And Jesus uses this story to explain that people have different kinds of hearts. 4 different types of hearts he's going to explain that people have when they're receiving the word of God. And the first one is they have a hard heart. The second one is they have a shallow heart. The third one is they have a divided heart. And the fourth one is they have a fruitful heart. So let me set up the context of what's going on here when Jesus tells this parable. Jesus is at the Sea of Galilee, and he has these massive crowds following him there. Jesus is the biggest show in town. I mean, he's doing miracles. People are coming out to see him. So Jesus is here with these thousands of people gathered around. I mean, this is the ideal situation for Jesus to tell the Jewish people about God's plan for salvation, right? I mean, that's what it seems like. But here's the thing. These large crowds, they weren't there pursuing Jesus because of his teaching. They wanted to see his miracles. Some people were coming out to be healed. Some were coming out to be entertained, right? They wanted to see what he was going to do. Some people were coming out just to see what all the commotion was about. The crowd endured Jesus' teaching in order to witness the miracles. And Jesus knew this. And so it's on this day when he shifted his teaching method and he started teaching in parables. He reached a point where he had been teaching the Jewish people plainly for a year about God's plan for salvation, and they rejected his teaching. And so he begins to conceal the truth from those who just want to be entertained. He conceals the truth from those who want to be entertained, but he reveals the truth to those who want to listen. Let's read about it in Matthew 13. This is what it says. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. And great crowds gathered about him, so that he got in a boat and sat down. And the whole crowd stood on the beach. And he told them many things in parables, saying, a sower went out to sow. And as he sowed, some seeds fell along the path, and the birds came and devoured them. Other seeds fell on rocky ground, where they did not have much soil. And immediately they sprang up, since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched. And since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among the thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil, and it produced grain, some 100-fold, some 60, and some 30. He who has ears, let him hear. Now, let's walk through this passage, and I'll explain what's going on as we walk through it. Jesus starts out, a sower went out to sow. It's pretty easy to understand. This is a parable about a farmer planting his field. In fact, around the Sea of Galilee, there are fields, and so it's very possible that Jesus, he looked out, and he saw a farmer planting his field, and he used him as an example, as the catalyst for this parable. See, back in Jesus' day, a farmer, he would plant his field by hand. What he would do is he would have a leather pouch on his shoulder that had seed in it. And he'd reach in that pouch and he'd grab a handful of seed and he'd broadcast it out into the field. And then he'd take a few more steps and he'd do that again. He'd reach in and he'd broadcast it out in the field. He would do this over and over and over again until the whole field was covered. Now, the farmer, he tried to be careful where he threw that seed. He tried to be precise, but just by the nature of the planting method, some of those seeds would land in areas where it wouldn't flourish. Jesus continues. And as he sowed, some seed fell along the path, and the birds came and devoured them. These fields, they had paths that ran through them where the farmer would walk on this and other people would walk on these paths as well. And as they walked on them, that soil, that dry soil would start to get packed down, oftentimes as hard as concrete. And so when the farmer threw his seed out into the field, some of it would land on that walkway. Of course, it couldn't penetrate that. It couldn't take root. So the birds would come down and they would just pick off the seeds that just lay there. Jesus continues, other seed fell on rocky ground where they did not have much soil. And immediately they sprang up since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched. And since they had no root, they withered away. Now in that region, there are large limestone plates just a couple inches below the top of the soil. And what happens is when they throw the seed out there, the seed goes and it goes into the soil and it starts to grow. But then the roots hit this limestone rock. And of course, it's not going to go through the rock. So then it uses its growing energy to grow back upwards. And the plant itself grows upwards. And so the farmer looks at this and he thinks it's going to be a great crop. But soon, it just dies away because there is no depth for those roots to contain the moisture. There's no moisture there. And the sun comes out, it dries the plant up, and it just dies. There's no roots. Jesus continues, other seed fell among the thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Now the farmer, he would plow his field, and when he was done, it would look great. But certain areas, there were roots of weeds just waiting to pop back out and take back over the land. Over at my house, we have these weeds. They're about this tall. They're called mugwort. And a couple years ago, they just showed up. And they are taking over everything. They're working their way across our field, and they're choking out the straw that's in that field. And we can't stop them. They keep going and going and going. When weeds take over, they kill their competition. So those are the three kinds of soil that Jesus describes that aren't that good for growing things. But then there's a fourth one. There's a fourth kind of soil. This is the good kind. Jesus said, other seed fell on good soil and produced grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. He who has ears, let him hear. This is good ground. This is rich soil. The soil is full of nutrients. It's an ideal place for things to grow. And then Jesus says that they grew 100-fold, 60-fold, and 30-fold. That is an enormous amount of growth. So when Jesus was done presenting this parable, he says, he who has ears, let him hear. Now, he's not just talking about people with physical ears, because most people have those. But what he was talking about was those people who were seeking truth. Those people who had their spiritual listening ears on. He's saying, you guys who are listening, understand this, what I'm talking about. Ponder what I'm talking about. Listen to what I'm saying. Romans 10:17 tells us the importance of listening. It says this, so faith comes from hearing, and hearing through the word of Christ. So Jesus, he finishes this parable, and then he leaves without explaining it. He leaves. Now, fortunately for us, his disciples like to ask questions. And they asked a question, of course, about the meaning of this. And so when they got away from the crowds, Jesus goes on to answer their question and explain the parable to them. And so Jesus starts out by saying to his disciples and the small group of followers that were with him, he says this, but blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. For truly I say to you, many prophets and righteous people longed to see what you see, and did not see it, and to hear what you hear, and did not hear it. Hear then the parable of the sower. And this is where Jesus plainly explains the meaning of this parable. And he goes on to explain that the seed is the gospel of Christ. He goes on to call it the word of the kingdom. That is the way to get into the kingdom. And the sower represents followers of Jesus Christ who are going out there and telling other people about Jesus. If you're a follower of Christ and you tell other people about Jesus, you are a sower. He also reveals that the different types of soil in this parable, they're analogies for different kinds of hearts that people have when they hear the word of God. And he walks through this parable and explains this to his disciples. And he explains the four kinds of hearts. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to follow this right along. The first kind of heart that Jesus describes is the hard heart. Verse 19, Jesus says, when anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what had been sown in his heart. This is what was sown along the path. So this is the soil that was hard, right? This is the pathway that was all packed down like concrete where the seed would lay on it and the birds would come down and eat it. What it's saying here is the person with this kind of heart, the person with the hard heart, when you tell them about Jesus, they don't understand it. For whatever reason, this person has a hard heart, and they resist allowing God's word to penetrate in their heart. And then what happens is Satan comes down and he snatches away the seed of God's word that was presented. He snatches it away, maybe through pride or through the love of sin or through the influence of a false teacher. Through a multitude of ways, Satan comes in and he snatches that away so that the hard-hearted person faces an eternity separated from God unless they change their ways. The second heart that Jesus explains is the shallow heart. Verse 20 says, as for what was sown on rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy, yet he has no root in himself, but endures for a while. And when tribulation or persecution arises on account of the word, immediately he falls away. So this is the person with the shallow heart. Let me give you an example of this. Maybe you know someone like this. This would be the woman who comes to church and she hears the gospel presented and she accepts Christ into her life. And she goes and she changes her life. She's on fire for God. She springs up and she gets involved in everything. She volunteers for everything in church. She's everywhere at church. And then all of a sudden, one Sunday passes, 2 Sundays pass, and she's not there. You don't see her anymore. And weeks go by, and you say, whatever happened to her? She's gone. She's not here anymore. Why? Because her decision to follow Christ was largely emotionally driven. It was a very me-centered decision that she embraced for a variety of reasons. Maybe she liked the church service and she was entertained by that. Maybe she liked the programs that the church offers. Maybe she liked the fact that people paid attention to her and praised her when she volunteered for things and she felt like she was part of something. But when difficult times came, or when people in her old relationships started mocking her for her new faith, she abandons it. There was no established root. She never realized that there is a cost to following Jesus. Following Jesus could cost you your relationships. It can cost you your family. It can cost you your friends. And when the person with the shallow heart, when they meet persecution, they fall away. Because God's word never established root in their heart. They wouldn't allow it. Next, Jesus explains the person with the divided heart. Verse 22 says, as for what was sown among thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and it proves unfruitful. Now we come to the person with the divided heart. This is where the thorns are, the weeds. This is the man who hears the gospel and he's receptive to it. But the cares of the world, they overpower him. Jesus says that he is preoccupied with the cares of the world. That literally is the distractions of this age. Maybe he spends his time obsessing about events going on around the world, and he spends all his time and his thoughts and his efforts on those things. Maybe he's focused on earning money and getting wealth. Now, please hear me on this. There's nothing wrong with money. There's nothing wrong with being wealthy. There's nothing wrong with having nice things. But when you desire wealth more than God, when your efforts and your time, they're mainly focused on your love of money, you need to understand that's a divided heart, and God rejects that. Jesus himself said you cannot serve both God and money. James 4:4 says this, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. This is the person who wants salvation, wants Christ, wants the kingdom, but also wants the world, wants riches, wants things. The seed of the gospel that was planted in this person's life, it got choked out by the cares of the world. Now we come to the fourth kind of heart. This is the fruitful heart. Jesus says this, as for what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it. He indeed bears fruit and yields, in one case 100-fold, in another 60, and in another 30. The soil of this person's heart is greatly different than the other three. It's been broken up. It's been broken up much like a field that's been plowed before planting. This person's heart, they hear the gospel that's been planted in their heart. They receive it. It grows. It flourishes. Now, the person with the fruitful heart, they are not perfect. They're far from it, and they understand that. They understand that they are sinful creatures who are separated from a holy and perfect God, and they deserve God's wrath. But they also understand that God knows this, and that he sent his son Jesus to come down and to die on a cross and take the punishment that they deserve for their sin. And it's through accepting Christ and following him that they're now able to be forgiven and be in a right relationship with God. They embrace Jesus. those with the heart of good soil, they understand this, and they determine that nothing is going to get in their way in their relationship with God. And so what happens is the seed of the word, it takes root in their heart, and it grows and it grows. And they go out and they unashamedly tell other people about Jesus. Now, when they throw the seed and tell other people about Jesus, sometimes it's going to fall on the hard heart. Sometimes it's going to fall on the shallow heart. Sometimes it's going to fall on the divided heart. But sometimes it's going to fall on the fruitful heart. And what's going to happen when that happens, it's going to plant itself, and it's going to grow, and it's going to flourish. And those people, in turn, are going to go out and sow the seed. Let me pull this parable and its explanation together for you here. We're going back to our big idea, which is this. How people respond to the gospel is determined by the condition of their heart. The condition of another person's heart as to whether or not to accept the gospel is not up to you. That is not your responsibility. God in his grace did not put that responsibility on to you. Your responsibility as a follower of Christ is to go out and to sow the seed. Sow the seed, sow the seed, sow the seed. As a follower of Christ, that is your responsibility. Matthew 28:19, it gives us our charge. It says this, therefore, go make disciples of all nations. That happens by sowing the seed. Therefore, go make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Well, here's the great news about all this. The power of the seed is indifferent to the sower. When I take my 5-year-old out in the yard and we go out and we plant some grass seed and cover some of those bare spots on the yard, I have a 5-gallon bucket and I reach my hand in there and I throw the seed out. And then my 5-year-old, he'll reach his hand in there and he'll do the same thing. But if you've ever seen the hand of a little child, you'll notice that they have a fat little palm and they have short fingers. That's the way God designed it. And they can't grab things as easily and as well as adults can. You know this if you've ever tried to give a child a handful of M&Ms, right? You put your hand underneath because you know what's going to happen. 5 of those M&Ms are going to end up in the palm, and then the other 12 are going to fall out on the sides of the hand. It's the same thing with grass seed. When my son reaches in there and he throws that grass seed out there, he's going to get some out in the good soil, but he's also going to get some on the rocks, and he's going to get some on his shoes, and it's going to go other places. But here's the great thing about that. The seed doesn't care. The seed is indifferent to the sower, and the potential is in the seed regardless of how it's sown. So when he takes his handful of seed out, a lot of seed's going to fall out the side of his hand, and it's going to land on the good soil. And that's going to grow into grass anyway, because the power is in the seed. It's the same thing with the gospel. The basic truth of the parable is this. The result of someone embracing the gospel depends on the condition of the soil, not the skill of the sower. How people respond to the gospel is determined by the condition of their heart. This parable shows us 4 types of people that we're going to encounter when we present the truth of God's word. And it shows us that the power of the gospel is not in the way you present it to others. It's not in whether you can answer every Bible question. It's not in how trendy you are. It's not in how eloquently you speak. The power of the gospel is in the message itself, that men are all sinners. And we're separated from God because of this, a holy, perfect God. And God saw our situation, and he sent his son Jesus to come down, to die on a cross, to take the punishment that we deserve, and to be raised again, showing that God accepted that payment. And when we repent of our sins and we choose to follow Jesus and put our trust and faith in him, we are forgiven. We're put back in a right relationship with God. Can I suggest to you that if you're not already doing this, start sowing seed, because the more seed you throw, the more likely you are to hit good soil. Don't walk around life holding on to that one seed, saying, I'm waiting for the perfect opportunity to plant this. Don't do that. Just throw the seed. Throw the seed. You don't know the condition of another person's heart. You don't know what they're struggling with internally, what's going through their mind at 2:30 in the morning when they're lying there awake in bed. You don't know what's going on there. You may be the only sower they ever encounter. Sow the seed. Let it land on the soil and leave the rest up to God. He who has ears, let him hear. Let's pray. Father, we come before you now and we praise you, God, for making a way for us to be in a right relationship with you, Lord. We praise you, God, for explaining to us the soils, God, and not putting the responsibility upon us that we need to change the condition of the soil. God, give us the courage and the strength to sow the seed. God, we are in a world that desperately needs to hear your word. We pray right now that hearts, through this whole situation that we're facing now as a nation and as a world, that hearts will be softened, God, that their hearts would be turned into good soil so that they could receive the gospel that is being presented to them. God, give people the ears to hear. We pray, God, that you would watch over us, keep us all safe and healthy, Lord, and give us boldness to go out and to preach your word. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Let me send us out. Now to the King eternal, immortal, invisible, the only God, be all honor and glory forever and ever. Amen.
Hey Grace family, again, we just hope that service was a blessing to you. I just have a few reminders to give to you. First off is that we are starting our prayer and fasting week on the 21st. So if you need more information about that, make sure you go check out our Times of Grace. And then we also have our drive-through scavenger hunt coming up on the 26th. That's going to be a load of fun too. Again, more information on that in the Times of Grace. And then lastly, we have our women's retreat, which is going to be in October 9th and 10th, and it's going to be hosted here at the Randolph campus. And if you want more information on everything that I just gave you, check out the Times of Grace. It is on our app, which you can find there, also on our website. And again, can't wait to see you guys next week.